October 26, 2005. The day Nicktoons Unite was released and changed the views on crossovers forever. Back then, crossovers were more of a little novelty rather than something grand and bombastic. But Nicktoons Unite had the most iconic characters at the time team up to defeat their respective villains. I still remember the day I first got into the series. It was at some kind of school event thing, and near the end of it, there was a PS2, and I vividly remember playing 2 games on it. Lego Star Wars the video game, and Nicktoons Unite. Seeing SpongeBob and Timmy in the same game together blew me away as a kid. But the story does not end there, because what made Nicktoons Unite even more crazy than it already was, is that it was not just one game, it was a series. 4 games to be exact. Technically 11, but those are just different versions on inferior hardware. Nicktoons Unite, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island, Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots, and SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom. Don't ask why that one is named differently. The existence of these games fascinated me, and I was a fan of the series ever since. But after that, it all just stopped. Globs of Doom was released in 2008. So the series was gone for a long time. But as time went on, Game Mill Entertainment would make other Nickelodeon crossover games like the Kart Racer games and the All-Star Brawl games. And while the most recent entries at the time of making this video have been really solid, in terms of story, they didn't have the same impact the Unite series had, and it felt like we would never get that feeling back. Until now. 17 years later, after the release of Globs of Doom and the Nicktoons Unite series ending, I saw the announcement of...
In a faraway land of magic and mystery, a great evil would emerge. However, a brave and wise and powerful and ridiculously handsome wizard would call upon his magic powers to summon the most ferocious, most awesome, most totally radical team of adventurers the land had ever seen. They alone would be able to... Imagination! Goofy Goober!
Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny. That's right, fellas. The Nicktoons crossover series was now finally returning. When I discovered this, it felt incredible to see the series finally return after all this time. With all of that being said, however, the game still needs to be, fun. I will not give it a pass for it being a Nicktoons Unite 5-ish. So grab your weapons, armor, and Krabby Patties as we head into Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny. Guys, you're not gonna believe this, but SpongeBob isn't the main character of a Nicktoons crossover game. I know, right? It's crazy to think, but it's true. It's actually Timmy Turner who was the star. And considering his absence in the Game Mill games, this was probably intentional. And he's playing this world's equivalent of Dungeons and Dragons, but Timmy gets bored after winning over and over again, so he wishes to be in the game's world for real. This not only brings Timmy into the world, but other Nickelodeon characters too, so our heroes need to team up, find the die power, and return to their worlds. Speaking of these heroes, let's talk about the roster. Because this game has a lot more focus on story and character interactions than the other Game Mill games, the roster is way smaller and only consists of 9 characters, those being SpongeBob, Leo, Katara, Timmy, Sandy, Susie, Danny, Jenny, and Jimmy. Wait, a modern day Nickelodeon crossover game with no Loud House? I knew this day would come. Honestly, this roster is really solid for the picks they had. We have fan favorites like the Unite 4, Leo and Jenny, and newcomers like Katara and Susie. The roster is already solid enough as it is. There are also a bunch of other characters that you can't play as but are still here. Pearl, Crimson Chin, the other turtles, Sokka, and our goat She. So I'd say this is probably the best representation in any of these Nickelodeon crossover games so far. It's varied enough to where it's satisfying, but not too much to where you need to focus on a bunch of stuff. And this also means that there are way more interactions than in any of the other Game Mill games. This is probably the most interactive these characters have ever been in these crossover games. Every single character text box in the game is voiced, and it's a real treat having these characters together and interacting. There are also so many great moments, like Danny comforting Susie and telling her there's nothing to be afraid of, Jenny calling Zuko a dreamboat, and the greatest moment in all of Nickelodeon history.
In that case, it's time to get impressive!
Onto the gameplay side of things. What we have here is an action-adventure RPG game where all the combat is real-time. Some characters are better for melee or close-up combat like SpongeBob, Leo, or Sandy. Some are better at ranged attacks like Susie, Jenny, or Jimmy. And some have a more experimental playstyle like Katara, Timmy, or Danny. While you can stick with one character the whole game, I honestly found it more enjoyable to try them all out and see which one you're best at. And while the combat itself, it honestly reminded me of a franchise I haven't thought about in a really long time. The Skylanders franchise. So I was already pretty used to this game's style of combat, which was honestly really fun with a variety of moves you get to use. Every character has a default attack they can use at all times, and a roll move that can be used to dodge traps and attacks. But when you level up a certain amount, every character gets an additional move that they can use. Up to 6 for each character, but you can only choose 4, so you need to think about which moves each character needs. And these additional moves are way stronger than the standard attacks, but are either restricted by mana points or by a few seconds, so you can't just constantly spam these moves. You need to decide on when the best times to use them are. Now that you all understand the general gameplay, let's actually progress through the game. After beating the tutorial, you get sent to the Tangle, the game's hub world. Here you can interact with other characters, switch your hero, purchase items, armor, weapons, all that good stuff. And it's really easy to switch out your armor and weapons between the other characters, so you're already even more encouraged to experiment with everyone. Pretty solid UI. Once you're ready, you can enter the portal and head into the levels. So we progress through the first world, the Bikini Bottomshire. And here's how the worlds work in the game. They're structured into 3 levels, each with an objective like finding something, or defeating enemies, or destroying obstacles. Then you get the occasional side quest from a character in the Tangle that they give you, and then there's a 4th level where you need to fight a boss fight. Speaking of which, we encounter our first boss, Plankton, and for what it was decently challenging. This will not last very long, sadly. We head back to the Tangle, and we get our first new recruit, Susie, and we now move on to World 2, Bikini Bottomshire Village. Here we encounter the Flame Fatale, consisting of Azula, Ember, and Angelica, who are also after the Die of Power, and are working for someone called the Dungeon Master. So we venture throughout the village and have our second boss against Angelica, who for whatever reason took so long to beat, like 15 minutes. She would just constantly push me away over and over again and had so much health. This made me think all the bosses would be like this if I wasn't prepared. Emphasis on think. After returning to the Tangle and getting our second recruit, Jimmy, we head into World 3, Old York Sewers, where we find out that even though some of these areas look like the characters' respective homes, there are actually just dungeons that look like them. As for the area itself, it's probably one of my favorites in the whole game with its whole maze aesthetic and really great atmosphere. It's one of the more interesting ones layout-wise. At the end, we fight Cry, who is a giant snake. And for whatever reason, this boss was significantly easier compared to the first two. We'll talk more about the boss quality later in this video. After beating this world, we get our third recruit, Danny, and we get a very special cutscene.
Hey, you seem mighty familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?
I don't see how, but I feel like we've met before too. You too. And you!
I feel the same. Have you haunted any houses near me?
I'm not that kind of ghost.
Interesting. I'm experiencing high levels of dopaminergic action just looking at the three of you.
How do you, what now?
Deja vu! Like we've all met before.
Weird. Oh well, we'll figure it out eventually.
This is why I consider the game to be a Nicktoons Unite 5-ish. Because even though while it has the same premise and does reference the first game, it also feels like the series is making a fresh new start for these characters. So, in other words, half Nicktoons Unite 5, half entirely separate game. But feel free to have your own placement of this game on the timeline. It's just my assumption. So after this cutscene, we move on to the Ghost Zone, where we have to defeat Ember to get the next dive power. This is probably my favorite level in the game. It looks the coolest and probably has my favorite stage layout in the entire game, with these portals we get to go through and these big castles we get to explore. Speaking of atmosphere, let's talk overall presentation. Aesthetically, I think this game looks great. Taking these classic characters and making them into a chibi style and putting them in a fantasy world reminds me of a certain other game. I just think the overall art direction in this game is just really fun and creative, and the characters fit into the style really well. I mean, just look at these guys. They're adorable. And taking these iconic locations like Fairy World, the Fire Nation, the Ghost Zone, and putting them into a fantasy-like setting was a really fun idea. The animation of the characters also looked really smooth. I particularly like how bouncy they all feel. Finally, while I did enjoy the cutscenes, I just wish there were a few more, but I guess the amount of voice text boxes in the game is enough to make up for it. Really solid looking game overall. After beating Ember and having a short scuffle with the Dungeon Master, we get our fourth and final recruit, Jenny, and we head into the volcanic wasteland, which sadly is not as good as the other levels. It's just kind of a generic volcano area which has annoying terrain. After all that, we encounter the next boss, the Dirty Bubble, who Jenny absolutely destroyed with her super attack. Okay, fine, I'll talk about it. The bosses are probably the weakest part of the game. I mean, I guess Plankton and Ember were okay, but Angelica was just irritating and the rest were laughably easy, especially with their super moves. Especially Jenny's! I'm just gonna say, there needs to be more of a punishment regarding the super moves rather than just 1 minute. What I'm trying to say is, just make the bosses harder, that's all. We now move on to the Fire Nation, and sadly, I don't have too much to say that I haven't already said. It's fun, it looks cool, you get it. But the third stage was actually really interesting. You have to get 5 leaves for Zuko so he can make tea, but if you get hit enough times, the cup will break. That was kind of a neat challenge, even if the level takes forever to beat. After defeating Azula, we now move on to the final 2 worlds, Fairy Forest and Fairy Village. That's how you know Timmy's the main star of this game. But I still would have liked at least 1 or 2 more worlds, because I just want to see these characters just interact just a tiny bit more. Hopefully we'll get some as DLC. There's also this one line Jenny says that I found noteworthy.
Guess we know who the breadwinner is. Or
tooth winner.
While I think this was unintentional, the fact that Breadwinners barely made a cameo into the game, but Loud House is not here at all, is both amazing and hilarious. This area is definitely a lot more puzzle themed, in my opinion, with a lot of gates blocking the way or rainbow bridges you need to spawn. We then fight Jorgen at the end of Fairy Forest, and finally, at the end of Fairy Village, we face the Dungeon Master, who turned out to be Vicky this whole time. That was a really great twist, and hey, Vicky's finally in these Nicktoons games. Took her long enough. She consumes the one-sided die in which that looks absolutely nothing like a dice, commencing the final boss, which was one of the more challenging ones, at least this part of the fight was. But after defeating her, she absorbs the souls of the Flame Fatale, which she says it's their power, but I mean, come on, that's very obviously their souls. And now we're at the true final boss. This is it. The ultimate showdown. It's gonna be so intense, and it's destroyed in like a minute. And with that, the game just kind of ends with us sparing Vicky, and everyone just goes home with no memory of this adventure. Kind of a weak ending, I won't lie. But that is Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny. And I might sound crazy for saying this, but it might legitimately be one of my favorite games of all time. Sure, it has a few flaws like the bosses, its short length, and the weird ending, but to be fair, those are flaws that some of my favorite games have too. This was a great way to bring the series back. Great presentation, endearing interactions, fun gameplay, no Loud House, it's got it all. You know this is something special when they hired a longtime Nicktoon fan artist to make semi-official artwork for the game, which is insane. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and thank you, Dice of Destiny team. Can't wait to see what you have in the future. And finally, happy 20 years, Nicktoons Unite.